Please welcome Dr. Bob Carlson.
Thank you, Robert. I'm having a memory problem with names lately, but I'll remember your name and I'll remember my name. We'll get it on.
Okay, well, I have a little paper here to tell me what your name is, so I'm cheating. Now, you came from immigrant families who farmed in Wisconsin. Now, they came from Sweden and Germany, right? Now, did the traditions from that homeland endure when they came across and settled here?
Well, I knew who the Germans were and who the Swedes were. I got to tell a little story about that. My mother and father met at what then was an older age, in their late 20s, and they lived about 2 miles apart, but one went to the German Lutheran church in one town. My dad went to the Swedish Lutheran church. And when they announced their intention to get married, they said they were going to get married in the Swedish Lutheran church. My German grandfather was very upset. That was considered a mixed marriage. The German Lutheran is just a little more traditional, and the Swedish Lutheran a little more liberal in church stuff. And so that worked out, and I guess everybody survived that, yeah. That was good. So my German family lived around us. They farmed, and I had cousins and second cousins, and there was another family I was related to who had the same name, and they were all over the place. And just accepted they were there. The Swedish family, most of them moved to southern Wisconsin, so I didn't see them very much, so a little more special to see them. And but they were kind of easygoing. The Germans a little more stern maybe on their language and their stuff. My mother taught me very little German. I was born at the beginning of World War II. It's not a good thing to talk German when World War was going on, so I didn't learn much German. A little bit of Swedish that I picked up here and there. Yeah. But they were different, but I'm going to tell a story. The German family, they had a reunion every year, the Swantises, that was the family name, every year for 40 years at least, and they always had a keg of beer at their reunion. The Swedish group, they never had any beer, or if they did it, they kept it hidden, but they were a little more straight-laced, I guess you'd say. The Germans a little more fun-loving and so forth, so it was different, yeah.
There must have been intense friction going on there at some of those events.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
In fact, my German grandfather knew my Swedish grandfather real well. They were in the same township, but my parents just didn't meet till much later because they went to different churches, different schools. So they got along, everybody got along. It was good, yeah.
Well, you mentioned school. Talk about the Romeo grade school you attended, where your father also attended, right?
Yes, my father's family is 9 children. Half of them were born in Chicago in a big Swedish enclave there, where everybody talks Swedish. They moved to central Wisconsin, and the last 4 were born in the town we call it. Unity was the name of the town. And so most of them went to the Romeo school, which is the country one-room school. There was the town school, which is a little bit bigger, and then there was the one-room country schools, and they were there because in the early days, you didn't have cars and didn't have very good roads, so you had to take your horse to school or walk to school. So most of the kids walked to school in my school. We walked to school about half the time. And so the one-room school was a tradition, and it was truly one room, 8 grades. Not all the grades were filled. My grade happened to have, when I started out, 6 kids. We finished with 4, and there was a lot of vacant grades. And so one room, I visited the building that's still being used. Now it's used as a tavern. And so I visited it, and it's not as large as it seemed at the time. And so the lessons were up in the front of the school. You sit in desks they weren't nailed to the floor, but they were on boards, and so a row of desks kind of shifted around together. Smaller desk in the front for the young kids, and larger desks in the back for the older kids. Some of the kids had been held back a few years. They were pushing their teenage years, and so they were big kids by that time. So that was great. And you heard the lessons at first grade, and then you heard all the other lessons. By the time you got to 8th grade, you heard it 7 times. And that worked out well. And they had a very dedicated cadre of teachers. They had this system of a one-room rural school education. My mother went to one, and Stevens Point was the name of the town. They were called normal schools at the time. And they had a curriculum for rural schools. And you went for 1 year, and then you could teach in a rural school. The supervising teacher came around, looked at your lesson plan and stuff, and they taught everything.
Well, didn't your mother eventually win an award?
She got in after she married my dad, and she raised the family. I had 2 siblings, and was a housewife. Taught a lot of Sunday school, and then after we all left, she went back to school. She had to go get some more credentials in special education, and she was an outstanding special education teacher. She had infinite patience with my dad. She needed it with my dad and with the kids, and with special education, they have a lot of patience. She did really well on that. She got a statewide award for it too.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah. So, I mean, education, though, was important in your family. Is that right?
Yes, I got to say something about that. My mother, of course, had been to one year of schooling. And my grandfather, for some reason, I'm not sure why, he was a Swedish immigrant. He immigrated when he was 17, 18, 19 to Chicago. And somehow or later, we got the Saturday Evening Post delivered to our house. It had his name on it. So he had ordered it for his kids, and it was still being delivered. They never bothered to change it, didn't need to change it. And we got the Milwaukee Journal. And so that was part of my education, and for his kids too. Is they saw this magazine, national magazine, and the Milwaukee Journal had all kinds of features in it. But he believed in it. Now there's one little story I have to tell, which kind of triggered the whole education thing. My dad's oldest brother, he's 18 years older than my dad, and he graduated from high school the year my dad was born in 1908, and he was a very good student. I think the class was 7 or 8 students in the graduating class. And the principal came out to the farm, these Swedish immigrants, and said, you have to send Paul, he was Paul, you have to send him to college. He's college material, he has to go to college. So he did, he became very successful. They put him to work in the bookstore in Stevens Point, and so he taught bookkeeping in college. And he was one of the earliest pioneers in teaching bookkeeping at the college level. He ended up in Whitewater, which now is the University of Wisconsin campus. And then he encouraged all of his siblings to follow him in going to school. And so they all did, except for my dad and one brother.
So a large percentage of your family.
They were featured in a Milwaukee Journal article and the State Teachers Convention. The 7 Carlson kids were all school teachers, and they were all featured in the picture taken and stuff. That's pretty neat. So I think that established the pattern for the whole family. So a lot of their kids went to school, and I observed that. And I think I told you about half of the cousins in that family went to some college. They didn't all graduate. And some of them went on, and there's Uncle Paul, I think, got at least an honorary PhD, and a couple of the other cousins had PhDs. And so I kind of knew you could do this. You know, if you went to college, it's possible. So I was a farm kid in every sense of the word, but then I knew I could go to college if I wanted to. My dad wanted me to stay on the farm, of course. Every farmer does, and very few boys do. But he supported me. He was very proud that I went to college.
I was impressed coming from a city school where the junior high had 1,500 students. You matriculated eventually from that one-room schoolhouse that had 20 to a bustling 4-room schoolhouse with 60 students.
That was high school, yes, at Unity High School. And you made every athletic team. We had baseball and basketball because the girls couldn't play then. There was no co-eds teams, so everybody went out, and I was successful, somewhat successful in that. I liked baseball, and we did a lot of that on the farm and in the grade school, and then we played basketball. And went there 1 year, and then they closed the grade school down after I left, 1 year at the high school, and they closed that down, and we went consolidated to a bigger school, which had all of 200 students. It was a big school. It was one of the bigger high schools in that area. Yeah, so I got to tell a story of that. It was so large, we decided, maybe my daughter hasn't heard this story. And so it's so large, they can't possibly keep track of us. So we skipped school one day and went to the county fair. And they found out we were gone. Yeah.
Go figure.
How would that work?
Yeah.
And so my dad was very upset with us, but we survived that. And we didn't skip school anymore. But.
Well, one thing you have to explain to me, it was during a speech contest that you discovered civil engineering. Now, help me with that. I
got to tell you another. Go back to grade school. We didn't have a phone. The school didn't have a phone. If you got in trouble at school, your mother knew about it by the time you got home. I never figured that out. And why does that happen? But back to the speech. We had to do a speech about a profession. What do you want to be when you grow up? And I somehow came across engineering. And so I was introduced to engineering, and I did the research and stuff. And so I started thinking about that, and I guess I did more research. By the time I was going to college, I was going to register in engineering. I knew that. I had a strong science background. I had good science teachers, good math teachers, but I was deficient in engineering math for engineering school, so I had to take a correspondence course. And it came in the mail, and I opened this book, and I looked at it, and I said, where does this stuff come from? It's got modern mathematics, and set theory, and this and that, and unions, and all that. And so I and another student, we just sit down, and we puzzled our way through it, and wrote out the papers. Their correspondence study, you had to send it in an envelope, and it went somewhere, and came back, and I guess I passed it. And so by the time I went to school, I was going to go to Madison. I was going to go to an extension center nearby, and then Madison is the big campus. And then we were fishing, sitting in a fishing boat, and my Uncle George said, we just started a new university in Milwaukee. They combined the extension center from Madison and the State Teachers College in Milwaukee and became the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And they have engineering there. So why don't you go there? And you can stay in with, and he had a duplex, and stay with me, and don't cost any money, and so I did that. So I literally went from, within 1 week, from the farms tours to Milwaukee, and registered for my career in college.
But before we talk about your college career, I found it interesting that when I asked you about mentors, you listed a mentor in each level, grade school, high school, and then college. Would you talk a little bit about them? Because I thought that was fascinating.
My grade school mentor was, in first and second grade, was Miss Anderson, and then she married my cousin, and she became Mrs. Carlson. I'm very proud of that fact.
Did it help in grading at all?
Well, yes and no, but and of course I knew her as a part of the family then for the rest of her life. She passed away a few years ago, 93 or 94. I just knew her. She was a very nice person, and her husband was my favorite cousin, and we did a lot of farm work with them together and holidays and everything. But I always teased her. I said, you know, Esther, her name's Esther, I've been to school for 12 plus more years, and I never got a D except in first grade I got a D from you in deportment. Now these older people all know what deportment is, and all they did was they dumped a bunch of rocks in front of the school, and we picked up the rocks and threw them at the girls.
What's wrong with that?
That's what you're supposed to do to get attention? So I teased her about that, and she gave me my only D. She got a big kick out of that.
And
so she was, but the other thing she did, she came in and played softball with. We played softball every recess. We had played other schools and stuff. And she was a very active athlete, and she was out there playing softball with us. I remember that. She was just great. Of course, I knew her the whole life, and her family, and still know her family and see them and stuff. Yeah.
Well, you listed a math teacher that seemed to have Mr. Bender, who covered all the bases.
Harry Bender. He was a remarkable man. He had 1.5 arms, and so you have to watch how people get along with that, and he did. And he knew his math. He was very practical, hands-on. We took a surveying instrument and measured the height of the water tower, and this we're back up in Colby now. I got to tell you, I went to Colby High School. That's the home of Colby cheese. So whenever you get Colby cheese in the supermarket, you can think of Colby High School. Yeah.
That's only going to enrich my shopping experience from now on.
And so Harry Bender was great. And he also taught the music, the vocal music. We had a boys chorus and a mixed chorus and a madrigal group and a glee club, which is a special group. I guess we sang 4-part harmony or something. Yeah, it was great. He was good at that. He's just a good man. He is still recognized. We have our high school reunion. We did our 60th last year, and they still remember Harry Bender.
Wow.
Yeah.
And your last mentor actually was your advisor, wasn't he?
In grad school.
Yeah.
And I didn't have him as an undergraduate. I didn't see him until graduate school. I took another course taught by another man, James Woodburn, and he taught hydraulics and fluid mechanics at a little different level. I got to graduate school, and then Jim Vilmont was my professor, my advisor, and he hired me to be a research assistant. He was a great guy. He taught fluid mechanics. And he showed me how you could teach a difficult subject to a large group of students and have fun with it. You know, he told jokes and stories and stuff, and so he taught me that. And I had a research project with him. So here I am, first year in graduate school, and in this hydraulics lab. I just love hydraulics labs. And we're doing this project, and I was following a routine that a PhD student had done this project on and completed. So I was following this pattern, and we're working up the stuff, and I'm sitting with them and doing over my thesis, and this other guy had made a mistake. So all my experiment stuff was wrong. We both looked at each other and said, "Oh, yes." And he said, "Well, let's do it over. You did it. It'll go fast, and I'll help you with it." And he did, and I finished the whole thing again in a week after I'd worked on it for 2 semesters and got the thesis done. Got to say a word about theses. That was before computers, anything, including word processing and nothing. And so there were probably electric typewriters. We didn't have one. So Cam typed both my theses with 2 fingers on a portable typewriter.
Wow.
She had to lose 2 fingers because the A, her middle, the little finger wasn't strong enough to hit the A, because you had to hit the original copy and 2 carbons. And you're making a mistake, you had to correct all 3 of them. So
yeah. And those old manuals, you really had to have some force to get those.
Yeah. Plus, this is our little portable. It was this is a cheap manual. It wasn't a big manual. And,
yeah.
So we got that typed, and then, yeah. But Jim Wilmot was good. He taught me a lot. Yeah.
Well, now, about 2 years into your college, you shifted from mechanical to civil engineering. And for folks that don't know really what an engineer does, can you kind of help us understand the difference between them and why you thought civil was a better fit?
I was in Milwaukee then, and we went to a tour of Alice Chalmers' factory. It's a huge factory. And I went into that factory, and I thought, this is mechanical engineering. It's big machines, and so I don't want to do this. So what am I going to do? And so that was a crisis. And so I went to the counseling center, and they give you a counseling test or whatever, and I qualified. I want to be outside. I'm forestry and probably some other subjects. I don't remember what they were. I remember forestry. Wisconsin didn't have a forestry school, so I'm still in engineering. And then in my drafting class, there were some guys in front of me. They were yakking it up about a surveying class they were taking. They were civil engineers. So that sounded like fun. They were having fun. And so I shifted to civil engineering. I was behind in surveying, so I had to take extra classes, and that all worked out. So, and that was a good move. I had my best friend in high school. His dad was the county engineer, and I think a guy knew that. He was a civil engineer. So I knew that too. I think that influenced me. So, oh, this is great. You know, get outside and do some surveying. We have a really good surveyor in the crowd here, Tom Scarborough. But do surveying, you're outside, and that's just great. Yeah. They say a word about the drafting class. I'm not a good drafter. It's pre-computers, And there's kids in there that had 4 years of drafting in Milwaukee. There's the big technical schools and stuff. And so I was really behind in that, but I got past it and had 2 years of drafting, and that worked out well. So everything worked out. And then at the end of the 2 years in Milwaukee, I went to Madison then and got into the system there, and everything went smooth at the transfer of students. I had to take an extra physics class in my sophomore year in Milwaukee. I was taking 22 credits, and I got appendicitis. And I missed 3 weeks, so I dropped the physics class. That's 5 credits, so I got back to 17. I had to take an extra class in Madison. That tied in. You asked me about my experience with public events. Well, I had the physics class in that building. I was up in Fairbanks by that time. A group of characters came in. They wanted to explode a bomb in the U.S. Army Mathematical Research Center, but they got the wrong building. They blew up the physics building instead. So that was my physics lab. I wasn't there, of course. One person got killed. That was terrible. And
Yeah,
as
that
part
is
of
awful.
the Vietnam era, a lot of protests, and Madison was kind of the center of that for that.
That area.
That was all happening, yeah.
Well, let's go back, because you really seem to take a shine at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and thrive there. What was it about that campus that you really responded to?
Well, Madison is a great campus. It's well situated. It's got lakes all over the place. It's got a big hill you have to walk across to get to the other classes, from one engineering campus to the hydraulics lab. It's just fun. And the students there were good. I had a room with my high school best friend, and we had a room in a small dormitory. It was a cooperative dorm. We had to do all the janitorial work ourselves, not a problem there. We had big football games, big stadium football games, basketball games. I had a friend who was a sports nut. He went to everything athletic, and I went with him, and so we just did that. That was a lot of fun. Madison was noted to be in a very good school, a very research-oriented school, good teachers, good professors. You had access to them, and so I just learned all that. But also, there was a party school, and it was in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin has a reputation being German, mostly German, and beer, and there's a lot of beer bars. So if you wanted to exercise that activity, there was a lot of places to do it. You didn't have to drink the beer, but that's where the party was. So there's the party atmosphere, but it was engineering school was very hard for me, and very hard working, and I just studied all the time and got through it. Now, one part of that I have to say, I didn't belong to any fraternities. My fraternity was a dish room at Liz Waters' dormitory. That was my social circle. And that was the girls' dormitory. And I had a meal job there. And it was a great job to have, because everybody else goofs off after supper, and they're watching TV or whatever. And so I went to work and got paid to eat and then to do the dishes downstairs. Well, I was in the dish room, and this young woman showed up. She was upstairs working as one of the waitresses, because they served the girls in the dormitories, very fancy. And she was in the dormitory, and she came down and ended up in the dish room, and so we got to know each other. And then I got a job upstairs. It's called bussing dishes, because the trays were really heavy, and most of the girls couldn't lift them. So we helped waiter then too. Then she ended up upstairs as a waitress, and so we got to know each other, and we courted, and along a little later than that, I tell people she seduced me with ice cream. She saved ice cream for me and tied it behind the pillars. She says she did it for everybody. Wow.
So, it sounds like Downton Abbey in Wisconsin.
Yeah. So this is my social circuit. Now, we had a social event once a month, and we went to the Italian Workingsmen Club, the IWC. They said, let's go to the IWC. Where's that? Okay. And this is what it was. The Italians had a kind of a lodge upstairs. They had a beer bar downstairs. They sold beer to the college kids. Anybody else wanted to come. That was so we went that once a month. So that's part of the social event, the fraternity.
I see.
Let's go to the IWC.
Well, I can see why the campus would be attractive to you. When we come back and talk about your dissertation, I want to talk about computers. But first, after your undergraduate, you worked for the Federal Bureau of Reclamation.
Yeah. You asked in one of your questionnaires, what did you do when you left school? I told you I left school 3 times. Left with a bachelor's, and I went west to Denver. I'd never been out of Wisconsin more than over the Mississippi River a little bit. And I went to Denver, and there was a big federal lab there, the Bureau of Reclamation. They build most of the large dams in the western states for reclamation purposes, power purposes, and water supply and everything. I thought that was great. It'd be a place great to go. So I went there. They had a very good training program, and every 3 months you shifted to another division. I wanted to go to the hydraulics lab, and they didn't have room in the hydraulics lab for me, so that's one of the reasons I left there finally. But I went out west to California. Now, California was just in my dreams. I didn't know what California was, and so we ended up, I worked on a large dam, Whiskeytown Dam of Northern California, and I got assigned to the grouting crew. The grouting crew pumps cement into the rock underneath it, will be underneath the dam, and seal up the rock so it won't leak. So I find myself, 4 months after I graduated, and I was walking down a tunnel 6 feet high with sticks sticking down. I had a hard helmet on. The guy told me, we got your name on the helmet. This is a standard joke. On the helmet, in case you get run over by the machinery, we'll know who you are. And there's a big tunnel, machinery, this little tunnel, and I was watching for the grout coming through. Later on, I worked up on top of the dam, and still watching for grout. That's just a great experience. Since then, I've encouraged every engineering student to get a job in the real world, on construction if you're civil, in a machine shop if you're a mechanical engineer, or do something for electrical engineering. You just learn so much doing that, and I learned that. So I came back to Denver, and then we got married in February. We courted that summer. Should I tell the story? And she ended up, by magic, I had a cabin with a friend up in the mountains west of Denver. She ended up at a resort. She was working at a resort just down the road. And so we saw a lot of each other. We had a date one night. I'm on the balcony in front of her dorm, again, kind of romantical. She says, "Excuse me," and she went over the railing and heaved off the railing. I've told that story before, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And she had mononucleosis and was very sick most of the summer. And anyway, we got married in February. And she went back to Madison. She was going to school there. She thought getting married, she'd be getting out of school, wouldn't have to go back. I tricked her, and we went back well, we got married in Denver, but not in Denver. We courted in Denver, went back to Madison, got married. Came back to Denver, finished up the school, Bureau of Reclamation there, went back to school in my master's degree. So that was the procession. I'm back in school now with Jim Vilmont, working on in the hydraulics lab.
Now, did your practical experience out in the field focus you to hydrology, or how did that work?
Yeah, I kind of got an interest in it. I had a professor, an undergraduate, Arnold Lenz was his name. He was hydrology, and he was good, and I just thought that was just neat stuff. Back on the farm, we had a creek running through our farm, so I spent a lot of time with hydraulics and stuff with that, building little dams and stuff. Then I discovered that was a little old plain river, and I was very proud of the fact I had a river running through my farm. And that got involved with the family in other ways too. But anyway, I liked hydrology and hydraulics and anything to do with water and flow of water. Yeah. So I shifted to hydrology. They were very much related, and it worked out well. And, yeah. So after I got a year of PhD work, and we had a job offer to come to Fairbanks to work on the Denali Highway. We almost took that for the summer. The DOT became the state DOT, it's after statehood, and they're kind of just getting started, and they got some state money and some federal money for state highways, but we passed that up, so we missed out coming to Alaska then. So I did my PhD work, and we came up in '65. I hired sight unseen by both parties. They had never seen me, and I never saw them. And they just didn't have visits or anything like that. That just wasn't in the cards. So we met
Did
our
that
first.
surprise you?
Well, I didn't know any better. We met our first Alaskans in Chicago. Ed Rice, John Hilpert, and Chuck Sargent. And they were out there, they were all gone for an education conference. So we met them for the first time. I asked them about their fishing. Do you fish? Everybody fishes and hunts. None of them fished or hunted. So what's this all about? So anyway, they were good people, and we saw them later when we moved up here. I'm going to tell you another story. I don't think it'll take too long. About why Cam had a great uncle, and he came to Alaska as a young Norwegian immigrant and came to Fairbanks. First of all, he's here in 1910. I see him in the census. And then he ended up in Anchorage. He's a very fine cabinet maker. He wrote and sent woodworking in back to Cam's family. So I knew all about Uncle Andrew when I met Cam and her family. And so he was probably the one reason we came to Alaska, to check out what Uncle Andrew was doing. Fortunately, he had died by the time we got here. He died in '58. We didn't get here to '65, so we missed him. But he was a source of inspiration I get. He had a great life. So that was one of the reasons. So I got to Fairbanks then, and we moved into the men's dormitory.
Yeah, so tell me about that.
It was cheap living. We didn't know any better. And we just had, we didn't have to pay for our room or board or anything. We had a cook
You're
kitchen.
sort of residence counselors.
We were resident counselors, yeah. And it was a dormitory of 10, getting them mixed up, 100 guys, 94 of them which were great guys. There's 6 of them decided to make trouble for everybody else. So that was a bit trying, but we got through it and said, never again. But we got through it. We had our first child in Madison before we came. We drove up the highway. We hooked a trailer to the back of the Suburban. We bought a 65 GMC Suburban from Cam's dad. She was a GMC dealer. Put a trailer behind it. The diaper pail got so stinky inside, we moved that back to the U-Haul trailer. We tied it there.
Probably cleared mosquitoes even when you were parked.
Yeah. We camped out on the way up and slept in the Suburban and so forth. So that was our Alaska adventure. Came up here the first year. It was great. There was a lot of faculty in there. Everybody was the whole campus was in either the Ducking building or the Benell building, maybe a little bit in Eielson. So we had all engineering. We had the business school in Duckring. We had marine science, the highway department, the computer center. Everybody was there.
So when you came up that time in '65, it was all but dissertation, but you had to do your dissertation. Yeah. And that required some computing power, which wasn't here. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about the role computers have played in engineering in your time.
Well, when I graduated with my bachelor's, we didn't even see a computer. A friend of mine followed me. The next year, they took him down and showed him the computer. And so there's no computer. And by the time I came back there, we started doing computing, and I started picking it up, mainly just learning it myself. But the computers, the memory, you can't hardly believe this anymore, was a big drum that spun around, and that was the memory. And you couldn't put too much on there because it didn't have much room. And the first one I used in Denver, you had to program in machine language. It's really laborious because if you put a programming language on there, there's no more room for your program. So they slowly got bigger, but what they had up here in Fairbanks was a semi-fast machine, an IBM 1620, and then they had a bigger machine. And that wasn't quite big enough for what I needed to do. So I wasn't making progress, and I was a little uncertain of how to finish it up. So we decided to go back to Madison. And they granted me a leave of absence. The university never quite believed that I started in '65, and I was on a leave of absence. They wanted me to start in '68 because that's when their book started. So we discussed that when I retired, and they finally saw that I was on official leave of absence for 2 years. We're back in Madison now, and that was great. I had an epiphany of how to do the problem, and so that part worked out really well. I had the computer. Cam started typing the thesis again with 2 fingers. So more pages this time. I had some great people I worked with, Jim Vilmont and some other people. And so I got done, and I was basically done a few months after I got back, and then we had to write it up and stuff. So I got that done, and then I had an opportunity to stay there. I graduated in '67. To stay there another year, there's a real outstanding person who came in to run a water resource center there. And so I had to stay with him, and I did some work and got involved with the statistics department, did some statistics. So it was a good year. And we finally came back. I investigated a few other job opportunities. They found out about it in Alaska. I was scolded by the department head. What are you doing? I thought you're coming back. So we got back here in '68. That
must have stuck that time.
Pardon?
You must have stuck. You've been here 50 years now?
Yeah. Well, no, we were going to come here 2 years and then go to Australia.
Yeah.
Never got to Australia. So we stayed. And we had another child by then. Our son was born in Madison. And we came here and had the 3rd child. She was born here. And so she's our Alaskan kid. And then we just started to live and do work and teach classes. And I was recruited for the Institute of Water Resources at the time as a statewide institute under the Vice President for Research. And it had the quality, it was very interdisciplinary. And that's lasted to this day. There's scientists and engineers, and we had some marine sciences later on, marine science people later on, and doing biology and chemistry and hydraulics and fluid mechanics and environmental engineering, and yeah, everything. That still lasts to this day. That was kind of unusual at the time. And at the time, I think one of you other people last year told you that there was the research institutes on the West Ridge and the teaching faculty down here. And we kind of combined them all together.
Mm.
So we were one of the first to do that. Yeah.
Well, that kind of synergy can be very fruitful.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I was doing administration for 11 years, and then I decided there's an opening in the civil engineering department to be a department head. So I came down and did that, and I stayed with that. I think I was a department head for three different terms, and then it ended up being the department head. So I did a lot of administration.
Talk to me a little bit about that, because you get such high marks as a professor, but
Yeah.
not everybody who is a professor is good at administration, but administrators sometimes aren't so good in the
Yeah.
classroom. How did that work for you?
I made it a point. My motto, I had to teach a class every semester, and I did. 2 classes a semester, no matter what I was doing, and I did that. I taught one of the undergraduate classes, one of the graduate classes. Paul Reichart did that too. After he was a chemistry, he was some administrator, he was still taught chemistry class until he got too busy, then he didn't. And there's a lot of people that did a lot of research, a lot of people did a lot of teaching, but wasn't too much in between. It's changed now, I think. And so I tried to do that, and that worked out well.
Is there some skill, though? I mean, administration, I often think, is you're kind of clearing the way for everybody else to get their work done.
Yeah.
And that can be trying sometimes, because you don't get the kudos.
Yeah, or you get the blame, you get the kudos at that end of it.
And you get the headaches.
And you get the headaches. But that's okay. I guess I did okay. I don't think I was a genius at it. I got to tell you a story about this. Later on I became I guess I was a researcher. Maybe I was a dean for a while. So I went to the provost meetings. And they were good meetings. Paul Reichart was the provost. They were good meetings. I can't mention her name. The person sitting beside of me, she's on her cell phone computer and stuff. I thought she was taking notes or something. I said, "What are you doing?" I can't mention her name. So I'm playing games. Don't say anything. So things tend to get a little bit of boring at times in administration. A lot of paperwork going back and forth. I got a reputation for, on the part of students anyway, for expediting the paperwork. I think there was one time, maybe when I was interim dean for a while, maybe I could do all the signatures myself, because the department head and the professor and department head and instructor. But I just had a point of view that we're here for the students, and this is our first chore and our first opportunity. And that's where the payoff is, when students come here and not knowing anything. I know that for a fact because I was a freshman student one time, not knowing anything. By the time you leave here, you can go out and be in charge of a highway project or a dam project or something like that. And it's just amazing what we can accomplish in 4 years. So I place a lot of emphasis on that. Yeah.
Mm. Well, I want to note something in a minute, but your Usability Award was really commended by the students. It was they who recommended it.
They got the idea. They asked me about it. I said, well, I'll give you some material, but they put it together and turned it in. And,
so that speaks highly of that.
Well, I was very pleased that they did that, yeah.
Now, your experience as after you got your Bachelor of Science, doing the practical thing, it seems to me now that engineering is driven by research and less by more practical hands-on application. Would that be right, or what's your perspective on that?
When I got into engineering at Wisconsin as a student, about half of the faculty did not have a PhD. About half did. But they had experience, and some a lot of experience, and they were very good at teaching. That was slowly transitioning then. So up to this time now, you practically have to have a PhD to qualify to be a professor. Now it's gone so far as now to be hired here as a professor in engineering, you have to have your PhD, you have to have a postdoc experience, and you have to have published several papers by the time you get here. Well, it's just the opposite when I started out. So that's changed. Yeah, there's more emphasis on research and technical things, but there's still quite a bit of experience. People come in with experience, and that's good. Yeah. When I had 2 sabbaticals. I tried to get out, and I hired on with a consulting firm both times, and just learned a lot, just the way a firm operates and people and so forth. And so I managed to squeeze out what I could, being in education for so many years, to squeeze out as much experience as I could. Yeah. I did some court cases and got experience there, just talking to people. I did a couple of rounds of officers and professional organizations, American Society of Civil Engineers, both local and statewide, and you meet other people and just learn people. I had some consulting assignments that I did. I think I worked on, believe it or not, there's been at least 11 gas pipelines. There's none of them gotten built yet. I worked on several of those. The first one was the was a Northwest pipeline, and that we did a lot of work on that, and that got shut down. I got a Yukon Pacific later. That was Wally Hickle's line, and that got shut down. So I worked on some more too, of various parts of it. Yeah, so I was very interested in working on practical problems and tying research into practical problems. Did most of my work with computer modeling, and that was my forte, and a lot of it didn't only adapted itself only to computer modeling. Some of it could be lab work. So that worked out. Yeah.
Well, then talk to me also about the regional emphasis, because obviously the far north is different from other places, and so raising up a generation of engineers here must be important.
I'm kind of watching the clock. We have another hour to go, don't we?
Oh, yeah. We're just starting here.
When I came here, there was 3 people. It was Chuck Sargent, Eb Rice, and Hal Payton. And before I got here, 10 years before, in 1955, the engineering community in Alaska, the agencies and the consultants and stuff, noticed people were coming up from outside, and they didn't quite understand cold regions, and they were making mistakes. In some cases, disastrous mistakes. They weren't doing the buildings right. The foundations weren't right. The water wasn't right, and it just wasn't working out. So they asked the university to put together a program in cold region engineering. So those 3 started a class from scratch. There's one other person, Joe Alter, he was with the state. He did the environmental for them. And so they started a class. And as far as I know, it's fairly unique nationwide still, certainly in cold regions, except for Anchorage. And I don't know of any other places where they have a whole program in a regional topic. But these mistakes were so prevalent and so disastrous that, and so they've turned around and they taught it for several years, the three of them, and then Chuck Sargent got into, he's recruited as dean of the engineering school, and Hal Payton got involved with the oil platforms in Cook Inlet. He was an ice expert, so Ed Bryce took it over, and he taught it then in Fairbanks and then Anchorage and then Juneau and Ketchikan for years and years till he passed away in the 80s, early 80s, 83, 84. And that established the whole field of cold regions engineering. Now there's many classes, both here and in Anchorage. You are required to pass the Arctic engineering class, they called it, in order to get a professional engineering license in the state of Alaska. And now they do it, there's some short courses and stuff that you do online, so it's not all in the classroom anymore. But that determined the whole level of engineering, in my opinion, in the state. In other universities, maybe one professor or two have some subject in soils or environmental or something they do, but not the whole course. So that's still being taught, and it's been taught for 55, so 60 years right now. It's still being taught. I taught it myself several times. Ed Bryce did it many years, and then Terry McFadden took it over, then John Zarling took it over. A few other people's filling in. They've written books on it. And yeah, it established the whole field of engineering. And even yet, somehow people get up here and they get in a position of responsibility and they design something, and it doesn't work and it fails within the first year or two or something because they didn't take the class. Yeah. So that was good. And that set the tone for the whole school of being involved in the community and being teaching. It was a graduate class, teaching graduate engineering classes. Before I got here, there was very few graduate engineering classes, and so that's all started about the time I showed up, and I had a part in it, helping it. I got to say I just thought of one thing. One of the jobs you do as an administrator, as department head or dean, or director of a research, is you hire people. And I hired a lot of people, and most of them are very good. And I got a name. We have one in the room tonight, Rich Seifert, who went on to be the energy expert for the state of Alaska. I could mention others, except I'm having trouble with names. But one, a lot of people know about this, but I and Dan Hawkins and Sam Harbaugh, we were interested in statistics. And we thought there should be a statistics program here, at least hire a statistics professor. So we made that happen. And the guy we hired was Dana Thomas. And he did pretty well here. He was an outstanding, Dana Thomas, and he was an outstanding teacher. He's a 5-star teacher. You know, nobody else can get that except for him. And he taught statistics, and then he's been an administrator, and he's still an administrator probably. I don't know if he still is, but he did pretty well. So that was, I guess that was my star hire. He'd be the star hire. but we had many others too that are still around.
Yeah. Well, finally, I guess to segue, I mean, the engineering has a spanking new building there, but the university had to take out a bond to finish it, which suggests that the value of engineering is still somewhat discounted in some quarters. And any observations about the future and the importance of that?
Let me go back to the past. When I came here in '65, the state of Alaska is about 1/3 of what it was now, population, and the university was mainly on the statewide campus. The entire statewide office was Wood, and he had a treasurer, an administrative secretary, and Peter Ray research, and that was the statewide office for the whole state. Community colleges were community colleges, and the state had very little money. They had found the oil in Cook Inlet, and that was kind of developing. When I came back in '68, I was out in Madison. Chuck Belkey was the dean, and he called me and said, guess what? Alaska will never be the same. They just found oil at Prudhoe Bay. So suddenly the state had money, and they've had money, and they've had the oil money until recently. The oil's wound down, the price fell, and so they didn't have the money for the engineering building. I think they appreciated engineering. they had started a program in Anchorage, so they had to have 2 schools now, and maybe that slowed it down a little bit. And the time that they talked about building the engineering building, they also decided they should build a power plant, and that sucked up a lot of money. That's over, I think, $200–300 million. He probably needed it because the first power plant was built before I got here in '65, the Atchison building, and the old power plant was next to the Bunnell building. They just tore it down. It was just a shell when I came here in '65. They probably needed a new power plant. But anyway, that put a lot of pressure on the finances. The building they have now, and I think in many ways is an outstanding building. Hopefully it'll be occupied and filled up and used as that. It has a big high bay experimental lab. And I told the structures guy, if he doesn't get a structures experiment going in there, we're going to have a hydraulics lab there. And I'm working on it with some of the people over there, and so they got to get moving. But then they had another lab concept, which is called an open lab, and it's a big long room, and you can set up your experiment here, and the person next to you can have another experiment, and first of all, you find out about each other and what the other is doing, plus you can't claim your space. You know, if you don't get an experiment going, everybody can see it, and you have to get going. One of the characteristics of engineering faculty in general is very protective of space. And there's a lot of pushing and shoving about space. They got to have their space and their lab and so forth. And too much of it is closed doors. You can tell what is going on. But they're always pushing on that and treating it as their space rather than the university's, their student space. So and this lab is good for that reason. It's very open. They have a very big modern machine shop, which is important. They allow the students to use the machine shop. The steel bridge competition, they build a steel bridge, mainly civils and mechanicals and other people build a steel bridge every year. And they build the bridge themselves. They design it and build it. The other schools design it and they send it out to a fabrication shop, and it's built professionally. The competition people allow that to happen around the country. So this is good. They have a lot of hands-on people. I got to tell you a story about the steel bridge. The first one, there was a mechanical engineer. He was a bicycle man. There was a civil engineer. He had a lot of experience in contracting. And then I can't think of the third person, but the fourth person, he was a genius in design for ice bridges and ice arches and steel bridges. Fortunately, he didn't go to class, but so he didn't do very good. But he's a genius. And the 4 of them, and they didn't know how to build a steel bridge, so they had to build from scratch. So they came up with a completely unique design. It looked like a bicycle, half of a bicycle wheel, because Simon Rickover, he was a bicycle guy, and he knew nobody else thought of that. And I remember standing with him in front of the fluid mechanics class, and he wanted to talk bicycle wheels. And so we analyzed the forces on a bicycle wheel. As you turn it around, and the spokes, they come under tension, and then they compress for a while, and then they're tension again. And so they're there, and then they had the genius design guy and the construction guy, and they put it together. And I like to tell this story because the people from MIT saw this, and they came over to watch it and take pictures and see how to build a bicycle wheel, a steel bridge. And they swept the steel bridge contest that year in the United States. Next year, all the bridges started to look like bicycle wheels. And so the competition people, and this is a good group that do it, it's a steel construction group and then the American Society of Civil Engineers. Then they kind of said, well, we got to come up with some rules now, and so we don't get the same bridges every year. So they still do well. They still build the steel bridge. They do really well. But that's was an indication of what we do here. We let the students hands-on, and they build things and use the shops and so forth, and it's not done by somebody else. Got to say a word about computers. You asked about computers. Now, the other events last year, they went to 1 hour and 16 minutes. Do we still have 16 minutes? Or are we done?
Take his time. Yeah.
When I started with computers, I got my first degree, no computers. By the time I did my last degree, It was a computer degree. And now it's taken over everything. It's taken over computation techniques, programming, instrumentation, and surveying. I was once a licensed surveyor, and I decided I can't keep up with it because it's becoming very technical, very electronic, and so I gave that up. Everything is done now. The students, when they do a report now, they do a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes they should spend less time on a PowerPoint presentation and do more on the report, because they weren't writing the reports correctly. So I would say, well, now let's do the report. The PowerPoint presentation was beautiful. Yeah, it's right. But let's do a report now. Oh, what do you mean? Well, here we got to start out. So we did the report. So that's happening a little bit, but everything's computerized, and that's good.
Can you identify potential failures virtually in simulations that prevent you building a model and then only discovering that flaw?
Yes, I can. One thing you should know is that when you design an airplane, they used to be designed in wind tunnels, and there's a lot of testing in wind tunnels. They don't test in wind tunnels anymore. Now it's all computerized. The whole air, the flow past the wing, everything else is a computer program. So it's essential you get that right, because you can't test anymore. What I found is that working with some engineers in practice and stuff, some of the programs are too easy to use. And river engineering, for example, is one of my main fields. There's a very good program by the Corps of Engineers in modeling river engineering. But what happens is that it's so easy to use, they kind of forget some of the fundamentals and they use it the wrong way. And so I tell them, well, did you look at the computation, the guide manual? There's a couple of manuals you have to use. And they didn't know what I was talking about because they went to a short course somewhere and they learned to use it. So I've seen that. They're neglecting the fundamental background, and even the background I had some really good teachers, and they had to understand the background of everything. Early years we'd had to do it mathematically, and then later on computationally. And so I was raised in that way of understanding things. So I insisted students, in my courses, you had to do it by hand first, and then you could use the computer to do it. So that part, yeah.
Did they have to use a slide rule?
They wouldn't know what you. They wouldn't know
Do you miss it?
I still have a slide rule. I'm not sure where it is. I remember, this is kind of funny, one of the first, it was a HP calculator, and I don't remember whatever the title of it was. 25, 45, see? Some of these old guys, they remember this. But, and a student showed up with one, HP calculator. And it was about the size of what is now a cell phone. And everybody's standing around watching him, including the faculty are standing around watching him use this calculator. So that started out, and then it came more. And then we had one computer for the department. Everybody gathered around to watch the computer and find out how to play some games on. You could simulate an airplane or something. And then everybody started getting laptops. And now everybody has their own laptop. We still have some department computers, I think, but they have their own laptop. And now they get so good they can talk to each other and talk to somebody around the world. A lot of collaboration now with the internet type stuff, with calculations. I hear about a cloud. There's a lot of data in the cloud. So every time it rains, I go out and look and see if any of that's coming down.
Just ones and zeros.
Yeah, and you see some cartoons. This is happening in cartoons. And they put their complete faith in the cloud. I've never used the cloud. So maybe I'm getting a little old-fashioned now with computers and losing the touch. I still try to keep up. I take free online classes. I've taken one on computers. I got a certificate on it. I do some other stuff with computers online and take more stuff. But it's hard to keep up. Yeah, it's changing. But to answer your question, yeah, you have to be very careful about somebody that doesn't really understand that using a big computer. It's easy to use a big program. you get some results that really don't make a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully it won't happen with the Boeing airplane.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Don't want that to happen,
Yeah.
especially when I'm on board. Well, Dr.
I,
Bob Carlson. Oh, well, okay.
Well, in our fluid mechanics class, I'll wrap it up here. I teach about airfoils and airplanes a little bit. I teach how they operate. And I still get on an airplane and watch the wing, and you just can't believe that wing is lifting that heavy plane and keeping it up in the air. And it always works.
I had to tell you, because we talked about Doug Kane, a hydrologist here.
Yeah.
He and I were on a flight, and he looks out the window, and there's fluid coming out of the engine casing.
Yeah.
And he calls the flight attendant over and points it out to them and said, "Did you know about that?" And she kind of looks in her eyes and goes up to the cockpit, and then comes back a few minutes later and says, "Oh, there's nothing to worry about."
Yeah.
But we did, yeah.
Well, sometimes because of the pressure differences, you'll condense the air and the water come out of the air. You used to have the contrails, and that's simply water that came out of an airplane. So that happens. I got to say something. My daughter asked me to say this. But when we were traveling, we traveled all over the country, and I wanted the kids to see other places and stuff, so we piled in our Suburban, and everybody camped out and slept in the Suburban. But when we came to a hydraulics lab or a wave tank or a big dam or anything to do with water, we had to stop and look at it. And they remember this. I don't know if it had an impact on them, but we had to stop the whole trip and go look at and I love wave. I didn't get to talk about waves. I love water waves and the wave tanks. I didn't do much research in that, but yeah, so I did talk about that, and I did. So.
All right. Well, Dr. Bob Carlson, thank you so much for talking with us tonight.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and you're a good interviewer.
Oh, good.
I watched it several times now.
They keep me around.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah.
You know, if you have some questions,
Yeah, we can do questions.
we got 16 minutes according to, no. But obviously some of you bring memories and experiences with Bob. If you have any questions.
I called Rich Seifert one night. He was in Pennsylvania. I hired him on the spot. I don't know if I even met you. You came up to work on a big project, a water project, then you just got into energy.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you. Everybody needs a break sooner or later, and I had a very difficult master's degree thing. You may not have known that, or you may have known that.
I think I remembered that. Yeah.
Here with a certain professor who will go unnamed. But you know, you gave me the break and started, and I stayed at the Water Research
Yeah.
Institute for 8 years before I got a faculty position. And the other thing I wanted to thank you for is you were a reference for me to get my Fulbright. And
Yeah.
if anything made my career,
Yeah.
that was it. That was the guarantee right there that I would be okay.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if you remember that.
I remember that now, yeah.
But that was crucial because you had had all that experience with me, and
Yeah.
you and Ron Johnson were two of the references for me. And
That's another thing I did besides hiring the right people. I had a knack for writing good letters of recommendation. I didn't make up anything, but I could write them in such a way they got the work done, and people got hired or got awards or got into graduate school or whatever. That worked out. Yeah.
Yeah.
A mildly odd question. I went through school 45 years ago, and my daughter went through school 10 years ago. And my question is, the scholarship program that was set up, how do you feel having, drawing more Alaskan students and throwing that down
Oh,
and convincing the
oh,
legislature?
yeah.
Your thoughts?
I think
So
that's
the value of the Alaskan scholarship.
I think that was an outstanding program, and if they don't create it, if we have another governor, we should sure get that done.
Yes.
B. Treadwell's in the audience. He's visiting us tonight. So, yeah, that was an outstanding program. Wisconsin did something really interesting. The coming year, if you're under and it's geared towards income, family income. If you bring your parents' tax return in, and you look on whatever gross income, on that line, if you're below a certain amount, You can go to the University of Wisconsin, Madison, for free, tuition free. I think it's an outstanding program. What they hope to do is attract more low-income people in the cities and stuff. Milwaukee has a lot of minorities, a lot of low-income people. Yeah, I think it's outstanding. And whatever I don't quite remember the details here. It's an outstanding program. I don't know if it's still, did it get discontinued?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, it was a dumb idea to discontinue it, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and thank you again for sharing your memories.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. Yeah.